Welcome, everyone. And today's going to be just slightly different. We're going to be jumping pretty quickly into our topic of fundraising analytics that matter, how to maximize your nonprofit's data for success. But before we do that, I would be remiss if I did not mention at least a couple of our fun holidays today and into the weekend. We're not going to do a full weekly commentary as we sometimes do, but we've got some fun holidays both today and into this weekend. So really would love to share those with you. Today is actually One Health Day. And if you're not familiar with One Health Day, that really promotes efforts worldwide to bring together health disciplines that affect humans, animals, and the environment. Also recognizing how closely our shared environment impacts human health. So happy One Health Day. We also have National Jellyfish Day, National Jersey Day. So go for all of your fun. I'm sure there's lots of great sporting events this weekend. Wear your jerseys today. National Sandwich Day. If anyone's getting close to lunchtime and hungry, enjoy yourself a sandwich today. And National Bison Day. Over the weekend, tomorrow is National Candy Day. I remember that. I think we talked about that last year. It's just on the heels of Halloween. So it gives you that reason to have your candy, have your kids' candy. So go dig into those candy buckets tomorrow. And if you're wanting another sweet holiday, Sunday is National Donut Day. So some sweet things ahead for the weekend. Don't forget that Sunday is daylight savings time. Set your clocks back 1 hour. We are going off of daylight savings time into Sunday morning. So don't forget, mark your calendars, set your clocks. If you have, I guess everyone probably has a phone that's going to auto do it for us, but make sure that you get the rest of the clocks around your house in sync. With that, we're going to jump into the session. We know that we can be inundated with data and that we can have a hard time even knowing where to begin with data, but it's also extremely important to utilize data to our benefit and to help us be more efficient, right? So today we're going to be exploring really, what is important in terms of data, how we manage our data, and how we utilize it to be more efficient, not less efficient, right? So with that, I'll go ahead and kick us off into the first slide, please, Trish. So I think this is an important question to ask. How much tracking is useful and how much is wasteful? I'm sure we've all heard the garbage in, garbage out, right? We're putting just really inconsistent data into our database, we're going to have a really hard time using it to our advantage, right? So we've got to have that in mind as we're thinking about how much data we're tracking. And if you're tracking details that you're never going to use, that could be wasteful, right? So you have to really think about what it is that your goals are with your data. And hopefully through our conversations today, you'll at least help identify those or be true to those for yourself so that you can take action or not and make sure that it's useful to you. Next slide, please. We've got to find balance, just like everything in life, right? Finding balance is important. Show of hands, how many of you actually have someone who is responsible for your database, or you yourself are responsible for your database? Many of you have that. I see a few hands, but sometimes there's actually nobody who's actually yes, it's my job to keep it clean, right? It's kind of a team effort, right? But if we just go on the assumption that we all are going to do consistent things so that we have consistent results on the outcome, we're fooling ourselves, right? So we've got to systemize what we can. We have to come to an agreement, every time we get a new contact, what is the absolute essentials? What are those required fields that we need to put in and have a system in place so that everyone who touches our database is doing the same things, right? Automate what you can, right? There are lots of tools out there today that can have things automated, especially if you get many of your gifts online. Even if you're making asks and you drive people to your website, or whether you're doing an electronic appeal, or whether you're doing a mailing where there's a QR code, if people are going to your website and it is connected to your database and it automatically dumps in the data, make sure that you have those fields set up in a way that captures all the information that you want, right? So let's automate everything that we potentially can. And we need to make sure we're focusing on people as much, if not more, than numbers, right? Information about our people is so much more valuable than the numbers. We have to know who our people are. And regardless of how good you are and how good you are at relationships, you might not remember everything if you just sort of keep it all up here, right? So it's so important to make sure that we're thinking about, the contacts that we have with them. When we learn something about them, that's valuable information that could help us make sure that we have insights next time when we talk to them. If we want to track, when their birthdays are, when they first made their first gift, all of those things are important, right? But we have to focus on the people. We talk a lot about we are not in the transactional business. We are in the relational business, right? Plenty of organizations are very transactional. That is not us. Philanthropy, to be successful, we have to be so much more than that, and relationships are key. So focusing on the people as individuals in our database is important, and that's really tough to do sometimes if we're not intentional about it. We want to build the data entry and review time into our normal routine versus setting aside time to do it. How many of you are like, oh, we've got to clean our database. We're going to focus on cleaning our database next week, and we're going to block aside all this time and clean our database up. It's not actually the most efficient way. You're going to waste a lot of time doing that. If you are more intentional about what you're doing on a daily, consistent basis, you have systems in place, that everyone's being consistent, you're going to be much more effective. Do it as you go. Many of you, and we'll talk about the CRMs that are out there, many of you have an ability to do tracking right on your phone. You go on an appointment with someone, you can plug it in through the app on your phone and capture that information. And if you don't have that, find a system that works for you to make sure the second you're sitting back at your desk or at your computer that you are putting in that information, and you don't sort of bank it and save it for later, because either A, the time's never going to come, then you all of a sudden have a database that's not current and not consistent, or B, you're going to set aside time specifically for it and you might end up wasting a lot of time. So build that data entry and review time into your daily routine. Next slide, please. And I'm going to hand it over to Jake.
All right. As always with these, we try to kind of give you like, here's hierarchical fundraising theory. In general, these are the things that you want to try to focus on, big picture. But then we also love to give you, here are the actual actionable things that you can do within your organization. We want to give you kind of walking away steps, or, okay, great, I understand that conceptually this is kind of what we're trying to do with data and what we're trying not to do, but what are we actually supposed to add, not add, track, not track, what's the sequence of it, and why is it efficient? So we're going to kind of go through some of these specifics to give you some ideas of things that you maybe not are doing yet, and hopefully you can take away a couple of tidbits and optimize your own way about how you're doing that. So if you can go to that next slide, please, Trish. So the primary data dilemma, and for most of us, if we're starting a job in development, is we likely inherited a database. This is not true of everyone. Sometimes we were at the foundation and the start of a brand new organization, or a brand new foundation, or a brand new nonprofit, or we're starting a fundraising program for the first time, and we get to choose a CRM and we get to start from scratch. And I want to clarify a couple of things. There's kind of two sides to the data. We're talking about both data that we track for donors, like that's data that we get on our people, data on our constituency, on our prospects. And then we also have data that we just track for ourselves internally. Those are kind of two separate camps, and we will talk about some of the specifics for each of those. So when I refer to data, it's sometimes, meaning like the things that we need to know about our donors, giving history and that kind of thing, but it's also like, how many asks are we making? What's our event revenue? Those are two separate buckets, and I will try to give reference to both as we go. So we likely inherited some sort of a database and an established program, and we know kind of how it works, and we know some of the things that are in there, or maybe we were involved and this was 8 years ago now, and it's some level of organized or not. There's a ton of information that we can sort an endless number of ways, and it's very overwhelming to know what is productive. I can go in there and be like, well, show me all the donors who are above 65 who have given collectively more than $10,000 and also have addresses that are within 50 miles. Like you can go and sort and sort and sort and try to segment for mailing lists or segment for appeals. And those are things that you can do as a kind of a one-off, but it would highly, highly encourage you not to sit and focus on the nitty-gritty of that and saying, we're going to segment every single possible thing. We're going to data ourselves to death. I'm a very data-driven person. I like analytics. I like stats. I like learning. So this is my tendency, is to kind of go too deep of a dive into this. So just would want to caution you that this is a tool. This is a great way that you can make some of your time more efficient. But if you get so deep into what you're doing with your own donor data and with your own tracking data and spending more time tracking than you are doing, you're actually losing back those same hours that you've earned by organizing the information. So it's good up to a point, and we're going to try to show you what that point is so that this becomes a time-saving tool and you're not spending so much time that you're having to spend that time back on just managing the data in the first place. So just one thing to caution you with is, unless you plan to do something with those specifics and that data, it doesn't even necessarily help to have it. It makes more sense just to call that donor, call that prospect, and ask them about what their passions are. If it was something that they put in 8 years ago and you haven't talked to that donor in 8 years, their priorities or their passion or their giving history could have changed 4 times. So just say, well, we need to go in and we need to clean all that up so it'll be current. It would take you so long to go and clean all of that by the time you finish cleaning it, the ones that you started with are out of date again. So we have this kind of continual updating of like, it will get better. It will never be perfect. And the problem with people who love data, they also tend to be kind of the perfectionistic type. And that lends itself to, well, we've got to get this fixed and we got to get it sorted. All the columns have to be right. And it just becomes this mess of like, this is what we do full time. If you're lucky enough to have a database person, they can get pretty close and they can spend a lot of their day doing this. But you also want them helping you drive revenue. We can talk about some of the ways that they do that. All right, let's get right into it. Next slide. So this is bucket 1 of 2. So this is the key fundraising metrics to track for donors. We'll talk again about kind of what you track internally, but out of the 2 buckets, this is the tracking for donors. So the first and most important, if you have to have something up to date, at a minimum, even if you're using Microsoft Excel as opposed to a donor CRM, which a lot of you have some sort of professional software, Razor's Edge, Donor Perfect, Bloomerang, one of these, or another one that I didn't mention, but you got to have at least contact information. We love having mailing address, a direct line, and then their email address. Those 3 things, you can pretty much get any piece of information to them. You can send them any kind of appeal that you have. You want to have that data captured if you can. Any way that you can capture that data through, if they're attending an event, you need to capture all 3. If they're giving a donation online, you need to capture all 3. If you're meeting them for the first time or you're doing prospect research on them, make sure they self-disclose. You're not like looking this up so you can find their phone number. They should know that you have this information about them at some level. But if there's one big box to check, it's your contact info for both donors and your prospects. You can start it at a line and go, this level donors and up, but really, really want to focus on that first. The second thing that you must know, very critical that you must know, is all the gifts that that person or that couple or that family, that foundation or that business has given, with a few details on each, kind of the why. If you can get more detail on it, that's fine, but you really need to know the giving history. So if you have bare bones and you're just kind of going with bare bones, contact information, name, etc., and then what have they donated to your organization in the past? And hopefully your database has a way to then add up their cumulative giving so we can track and look at those numbers as well. In terms of what we want to know about a donor, those are kind of the top 3. That really kind of covers 95% of what we have to know about our constituents. The next thing, and this goes back to Marty, what Marty was saying about you want to try your best to record every interaction with your donors. And as soon as you have them, instead of saying, well, on Friday afternoon, I'm going to input all my data. It's like, no, if you had lunch with one of your donors or one of your prospects on a Tuesday, just real quick in your car, like pull out your phone, type 1 or 2 sentences about it. Hey, meeting went great with Sherry. She expressed that she really liked this, this, and this. She did not seem interested in this. Just a couple of things about how that conversation went. If you learn something about them, oh, also her dog's name is Misty. Good thing to know. We just want to have a couple of tidbits in there. It's so quick. And if you try to do it like in these big blocks and try to find time to do it, it takes so long. So just kind of do it on the fly as you go. It's the same concept as, instead of putting your dishes in the dish or in the sink and having the sink just kind of overflow, then you have to spend 35 minutes doing the whole set of dishes. Just quickly rinse and put in the dishwasher every single time. It's not that you're necessarily changing the task, but you're doing it piecemeal throughout the day as you're having different meals and as you're cooking. Or this is the clean as you go, while you're cooking method of inputting the data into your prospect. So just try to do it as you do those other activities instead of letting it build up. The next thing is any reason, and this is not critical, but if you want to go one layer deeper than that, reasons to give cards or gifts or reach out in some way. So if they have an anniversary, that could be the anniversary of their marriage to their spouse. It could be their anniversary of the first time they gave. If you're in if it was a memorial gift, it could be the anniversary of the person who passed away. Whatever these dates are, helps to know them. What's their birthday? It really gives you a great excuse you don't have to send your donors all birthday cards or call them all on their birthday. But if you have those things in the database, you now have the flexibility and the agency to choose to do that if you want to. Or if you say, hey, we want to implement or bolster our stewardship program this year, we're going to call all of our donors on their birthday. Oh, crap, but we haven't been tracking birthdays. So how do we get all their birthdays? It's like, we can't get them all at once. Maybe you send out something and say, hey, tell us your birthday. But the better way is just kind of get those soft one-on-one interactions and learn them slowly as you've spoken to these donors and these prospects over the years and over the months. So that's one more layer. The last thing is just kind of key areas of interest. If they have a specific passion for a specific lane of, your nonprofit may offer a variety of different services in the space that you serve. What are the specific things they're passionate? If you're a hospital, are they passionate about cancer care or cardiac care? If you're an organization that does human services, are they passionate about, helping children? Are they passionate about helping geriatric care? So these could be different things that we have in here. But just if you learn or you hear those things in the conversation, just pop them in the database. Again, you don't want to try to carry this around in your brain. Obviously, we want to do a great job of knowing our donors and carrying this portfolio of people that we know. Maybe it's 50, maybe it's 80 people or so. But we want to try to use this as kind of a second brain. We don't want to have to rely on our own memory. We got a lot to focus on. So if we can dump these things just as we learn them, and instead of trying to go back and say, well, I saw on the forum that he said we should know, all of our donors' areas of interest. So we're going to send out a thing and we're going to try to learn. It's like, that's going to take you way too long. So just instead, maybe start now with each time you interact with a prospect or interact with a donor that you learn those couple of areas of interest and just enter them one at a time so that a year from now or 2 years from now, you do have a huge chunk of your primary supporters and your recent supporters filled with this information. So that's a decent way to start, but we really highly encourage to kind of, in this order of priority, at least get these information or as much as you can all the way down that list. All right, let's talk about the other side. This is the key fundraising metrics to track for you. This is internal. So this is the bucket 2, half number 2 of this. We really, really try to focus on our fundraising goal. We got to raise $2 million this year. We got to raise $1.5 million this year. We need to bring in $100,000 this month. That's something that we definitely can look at. What we care more about is the number of asks made in each month or year. This is the same concept. And I get the best example I can give of this is if you're wanting to lose weight. This is a goal that a lot of people have. I want to lose weight. So you put on your goal list, I want to lose 2 pounds every single week for the next 2 months. You can't actually action those 2 pounds out. There's nothing you can do that, like, you can't put it on your to-do list, lose 2 pounds. And on Friday, I'm going to check that off because I've lost 2 pounds on Friday. You can't actually do that. That's the end result. That's the goal of what you're setting. It doesn't help you to set that goal. Instead, what would be helpful is to say, I'm going to eat in a caloric deficit 5 days a week, and I'm going to go to the gym or I'm going to go for a walk 3 days a week. Those are things you can put on your to-do list and you can action that will result in those 2 pounds coming off at the end of every week. But you're really focusing on, here's what I want to hit. We're putting in these things that we can actually do. What can I put on my task list that I can actually track? Not what can I put on the output that I can actually track, because that's not actually as helpful for you. So we track number of asks. Say we're not bringing in any $10,000 pledges. Well, how many $10,000 asks are you making? If the answer is 2 and you got turned down by both, maybe you should ask 12 and see if you can get 3 of those. So you're just kind of pushing up that thing that you can control. I want to set more appointments for donors who could potentially give a pledge of 10,000 or more. That's something very actionable. You want to look at what size asks you're making. And this is if you're going to make a dashboard for yourself, there's plenty of free templates on Google for this. You don't have to use us for that. What size asks you're making and how many. Say if you're doing appeals, you're sending out mailings, great things to track is How many are you doing? Who are you sending to? What size asks are you putting on there? And then what's your return on the investment? Those are some easy ones. We try to get super data analytical with our annual mail appeals. And sometimes people have us come in and optimize their mailings. Well, what are all the different details we need to track? It's like, let's look just big picture. Let's go with the absolute basics. What are you sending? What does it cost to send that? How many hours did it take you approximately to set it all up and send it to the printer and all that? And then what is the dollar amount and number of gifts you're getting back? You can go a little deeper if you want and say, well, this percent were new people and this percent were repeat donors. We captured this many lapsed donors, and those things are helpful. And if you want to go one layer deeper, you can look at those things, but really it's just money in, money out. Event revenue, I would highly encourage you to look at the amount of time that your staff and volunteers to put in and what are the paid hours on top of that, and subtract that from your gross. For event revenue, it might be less than you think. That net is great, but if you spent 65 hours and you made $13,000 net, you probably actually lost money in that case. So just make sure we're keeping an eye on that. The things that we do tend to track for events on top of just money in and money out are attendees that are new and old. How many are new? How many are repeat? How many of those people are already donors? How many of those people are lapsed donors who haven't given in a while, but now we recaptured them? How many of those people are people now that we can follow up with, that we have their contact information? We've captured it for the first time. It's just not about just money in, money out. You don't want to go crazy with this, but you want to go one small layer deeper past that. So I want to pause for a minute because that was a lot of information, both from the side of the donors and the side of the internal metrics. Just a question for the room. What else that maybe we haven't talked through or mentioned do you track for your own organizations? Would love to hear from people who've been doing this. Donor retention. Yeah, Hannah, do you mind unmuting yourself and just speaking to that a little bit? Y'all do a nice job with that. Could you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, you read in the literature over and over again that it costs you a lot more money to find a new donor and a lot more time than to work with existing donors and keep them engaged and have them repeat their giving, and hopefully you're working to move them up the giving ladder.
Absolutely. And just to put some numbers to that, it's about 5 to 7 times more expensive to capture a new donor than it is to keep an existing one. So obviously advantageous there. And then in terms of what the country does as a whole, charities in the US nationally, their donor retention rate last year was like between 43, 44%, somewhere in there. So not great. We certainly want to be way better than that. A proper or a more optimized donor attrition rate looks like something between 80 to 95% of our donors giving again. You're not going to get 100%. That's an unrealistic goal to make, because you'll have some people who just give one-off for lots of reasons. A memorial gift, their friend asked them to, but they're not really engaged, nor do they care about the mission. So 100% is not realistic, but you can get north of 80 if you do a really nice job with stewardship. We have plenty of, historical materials if y'all want information on that stuff on our website, but that would be a really strong one too. Tammy, if you don't mind unmuting yourself just for a second and kind of talking us through your process on recognition gifts, because I think that's a really important one too.
Sure. One of the ways that we let our donors know that we appreciate them is by providing them with recognition gifts, smaller tchotchke kind of things for the one-offs, bags, water bottles, that kind of thing. But then it goes up to photographs with a spouse, pins that they can wear at different events, and that all gets tracked as well, to add to the amount of touches that we have with the people each year.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. So you're even going through from your stewardship and not just doing here's what people get, but then once they get those things, you're entering that in and saying, okay, Marty gave a gift last year, and here are the 6 things that we've done with or for her since that happened, and keeping good records on that. I think that's phenomenal. Karen, do you mind unmuting just for a second and kind of talking through, you have a couple on there. Obviously the source of gift is big. Where are we getting our new donors? And can you talk a little bit about how y'all do that?
We'd like to know whether the gift has been, the source of it, to see, are we too heavy on grants? Do we need to amp up our annual giving program? Is annual giving increasing or decreasing? Are the grants the same as last year? Can we ask for more? Have they told us that we have to sit out a year before we can ask again, just to know, where the money is coming from, so that you can see if you're increasing or decreasing, or are you too heavy in an area? Is it too much government funding or grant funding, private foundations, or do we need to look at finding more individual donors? Are we moving them up the pyramid, or things like bequests realized, those sort of things, just so you have an idea holistically of what your revenue looks like.
Yeah, I think that's so important what you said, because, in your 990, when you report on your taxes, it all just gets dumped into contributions and grants for the year. And there may be pledges that are multi-year, and there may be some from, like you said, bequests that have come in kind of passively or actively. You have some that's grant and government funding. What are the individual donations? And kind of seeing, like, what can we double down on? Like, we spent this much time on grants, but only 3% or only 4% of our revenue resulted in that. So maybe we shift some of our hours and effort into this area because we know that was more profitable for us. So I think that's fantastic. Okay, so for this next section here, I want to give you some more additional actionable things. So if we can go to the next slide, Trish. This is just a basic prospect tracking sheet that we use. So, we have great systems set up, obviously, for our donors oftentimes, but this is just one example. There's lots of customization to do this, but just as you're looking at your people who you're going to approach for a gift, this is the type of information that we like to have, because we haven't captured hardly anything yet, saying, hey, maybe they're in our database, maybe not. Maybe their name found their way onto a list. So we found that this is a key thing. Just their name and contact info. What's their history with the organization, giving or otherwise? What associations they have? What current project do we feel like we're going to offer them as a result of that? We talk a lot about connectors, cultivators, and closers, the people who find that connection and set up that first meeting, the people who talk about the project, and the people who are actually making the ask. Maybe we assign some of those out. And then we can record, like, hey, if we went and talked to these people, or we invited them for a tour, or I got a phone call with them, what was that like? What are the notes in that meeting? What is the next step? Just so that we always, for our top 10 or top 25, or even maybe just start with 5, here are the things that we track to make sure that we always have some kind of follow-up in our pipeline with our top people. And then we just kind of keep that status bar live in the far right. Now, you can add more columns to this. You can take things away you don't feel are relevant, but we like to use something like this with a lot of our clients, just because we want some kind of continuous tracking mechanism. There's no perfect way to do it. It's how it works best for you. But we focus so much on donor that we sometimes forget about, hey, there are prospects too that would be great to have this information. And then once we get the gift, maybe they go in their database, or maybe beforehand, but we want to keep these things in mind. Okay, for the next big section here, just want to give you some actionable insights on these. These are things you can actually take and do. Highly encourage you. This, again, brought it kind of into the 2 camps again, donor on one side and then internal metrics on the other. So let's go through those one at a time really quick here. So what to do with donor data. So you have all this data, you've been tracking it correctly, you've done a nice job with it. What's the actual point of this? How does this help me? The first thing, and probably most important thing, is it allows you to prioritize your prospects. Now, your prospects are probably your donors as well. So you want to identify your most consistent givers, people who've given $500, $1,000 a year for 7 years in a row. Great candidate for a major gift or a large gift for them, whatever that might be for them. Obviously, your largest givers, you want to know those big one-time gifts. Keep your top 10 or 25 in the last 3 years right at top of mind. Keep them in your contact list. Keep them in your touch points. Keep them in your kind of stewardship flow. You can't talk to all of your donors at a maximal amount. So this is the one that this is the ways that we prioritize. Consistency being the big, size being big, and then givers who also serve. So these are people who are your volunteers. These are people who serve on your board. If they have some kind of meaningful time that they're giving on top of their already gift of whatever size, they've obviously shown a strong affinity for your mission, and they should be prioritized in terms of that pipeline. And maybe for a large gift. So we say, oh, we don't know where to start with major gifts. This is exactly where you should start with major gifts. Consistency, size, and people who are giving of their time as well. The next thing is to kind of structure your stewardship program, which again, stewardship is what we define as all cultivation after the first gift. So it's the same kind of stuff. There's not really a difference in it. It's just those cultivation touch points that we have after a gift. Some of you kind of touched on this already. structured around your historical giving data. So whatever stewardship program or policy you put in place, have it with respect to those 3 metrics that we mentioned kind of right on that first bullet. And if you can, use that to find any excuse to cold reach out. You want to cold reach out all the time, but it's great to have it attached to. Say, why are you calling again? Well, I just wanted to say happy birthday. Or, hey, just want to let you know this is the anniversary of the first gift that you gave to our organization. I don't need anything from you today. I just wanted to call and say that we appreciate you so much for what you do for our team and our mission. Give them an excuse to invite them to something, a stewardship event. Whenever you call them or send a letter or send an email or something, just have, hey, I wanted to reach out to you because, not just I wanted to reach out to you. Now, sometimes that might be okay. Say, hey, I thought about you today. Like, that's a nice thing as well. But we try to attach some kind of secondary reason to it to give it, oh, I see why they'd want to reach out. They remember my birthday or my anniversary. That's so nice. And then, of course, once you get through the process of properly stewarding, properly cultivating, and kind of moving these people along through the pipeline, you'll still use that information to customize each ask to something specific, or if there's a naming opportunity, even better. You want to customize that to the specific donor. So that's the most important things you want to do once you've captured this data and started to do this correctly. Okay, next slide. On the other side of things, what to do with your internal data. So well, these are the things that we track. What's the purpose of this? What do we do with this? Again, going back to, you want to focus on the system, not the goal. I'm setting 3 appointments a week, or I'm going to spend 2 hours per week calling prospects and trying to set up lunch or coffee meetings. Like, that's I can put on my checklist, I can put on a thing, I can check it off. Not, I want to receive $100,000 in income this month. That's a great goal. You can't put that on a to-do list. You have to have things that are system-based, not goal-based. Again, instead of I need to raise $100,000 this month, it could be I need to schedule 3 qualified asks for $100,000 this month. That's a much better way to frame that. And it's data driven, because you know from your database who might be a good candidate for those $100,000 asks. If you can't do everything. So try to decide based on ROI, which activities are going to provide the best return for you. Just the spoiler, it's probably major gifts. We know that time for dollars, time and again, that's the best way to spend our time, and using data to prioritize and kind of customize those major gift asks is right at the top of our list. But as Karen and Tammy and a couple people have mentioned, these are the things that we need to track, because it gives us insights about what to do next. Like, the only point to really capture data and to use data is to have more informed decisions about what you're already doing. Say, this is my time split, but I can now look at historical data that we've tracked. We can just keep the basics. It does not have to be overly complex, but we use that to reprioritize our time and push things that, if I have to decide, because I'm a development staff of 1 or 2, I have 80 hours of things I could do in a week. I can't do it all. I'm going to have to choose, and I choose based on ROI from historical data that I've already captured, because I've been doing this well for a while. And just use that basic data to set your schedule. And then don't overthink the rest. We say, well, we can data ourselves to death, or we can optimize. If you spend too much time optimizing, you're now losing that time back again with all the data optimizing. So don't analyze too much. Track the basics. Use it to prioritize how you spend your time, and then use that to maximize your philanthropic revenue. And that's the way that we found to best execute this. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Marty to close us out with some final thoughts here.
Thank you, Jake. Now that you know how to optimize it, let's talk about effective data management. Next slide, please, Trish. So actually, let's start with this. If you could, in the chat, everyone write down what CRM you use. You need to have a CRM. If you don't have one, you probably should. You can start with an Excel spreadsheet, but it's going to very quickly become much more difficult to use. Little Green Light, Donor Perfect, Pipeline Deals, Blackbaud, any additional, let's see, Razor's Edge. Perfect. That's some great ones. There are pros and cons to all of them. What I will say is you need to find one that's right for you. All the time I have people say, we've got Razor's Edge and we spend all this money on it and we don't do anything with it. Well, if you're doing something like a Donor Perfect or a Razor's Edge, it is much more advanced. There's going to be a higher cost to it. But if you're not using it for the purposes that you need it for, a better choice may be something that's more budget friendly, like Bloomerang or Salesforce. So obviously there are pros and cons to all of them, and there are some really sophisticated, fantastic things, time savers, that can be done with some of the much more advanced systems. However, you've got to make sure you're utilizing it to its intended purpose, or it's just going to be sitting there. So it's, it's important to sort of assess what you need and choose your CRM for your donor data for what's best for you. And you have to, assess that. As we already said, track donations and interactions as you go, not in bulk. I think you've got to, the interactions, especially as you go, you're going to forget things, you're going to confuse them, you're going to just completely not do it if you bulk them at the end of the week. Donations, I've actually, heard places that say, hey, we put all of our donations in every 2 weeks. That's kind of probably not often enough. If I make a gift at the beginning of that 2 weeks and you don't put the donation in your database for 2 weeks, and then your follow-up happens from there, that's a little bit longer than you want to be getting back to your people, right? To say thank you and start all of those meaningful interactions. So make sure that you're tracking interactions and donations as you go, and have some systems in place to do so much more expediently. Create that short personal dashboard. How many of you have your own dashboard in your database and you've set it up? Anybody inherit a dashboard and they're like, I have no idea why all these things are here? I've done that, where I, for the longest time, was like, why is this the first thing? This is not important to me. You want to find out what the most important things are for you, and that's the most important income producing activities, right? Use it to help you. Make sure that that dashboard is something that's there. It's showing you what you're doing. It's tracking it. It is giving you that little extra push to do the things you need to do anyway, right? Jake mentioned it earlier. The things that we know we need to do anyway. It's helping us make more informed decisions. So this is a great question, Hannah. What are the top 5 things on your dashboard? Anyone care to share what the top 5 things are on their dashboard? Great question, Hannah. Would love to hear from the group. Feel free to unmute and speak to it, or drop it in the chat. Come on, someone's got to have a dashboard pulled up on their computer right now. Anyone? No one?
Hannah, what's on your dashboard?
Yeah.
I think actually Mary or Emily are probably better equipped to answer that question.
That's great. Mary or Emily, one of you have?
Yeah, I could speak to it. We
Thank
do
you.
a monthly dashboard where we track our like lapsed donors, reactivated donors, new donors, new monthly giving donors. I can't think of what else is on it. Mary maybe could remember. And then just like where we're at with our goals monetarily, I guess, as well for the year.
Yeah, segmenting them out like that is really smart. I'm glad that you mentioned that too, because like you can just say, oh, we got this many gifts, or we got this many gifts in a month, but some of them were first time, some of them they hadn't given in years, but now they are again. Some of them are the consistent repeat. Are they monthly? Are they one-time gifts? Those are all really awesome things to make sure that you're keeping up to date on there. I think that's fantastic.
Karen, thanks for joining in the chat.
I can share on my dashboard if you'd like.
Please do.
I'm relatively new, but this was one of the things that my supervisor worked with me to set up our dashboard pretty quickly. This data is kind of new and I'm just getting used to it, but we have an appeal summary, a proposal status, a recent gift list, donor giving analysis, and appeal package responses. And so I'm just starting to look at this data and use this data more efficiently. We also have a campaign summary with all of our that I can look at right away and see our annual giving, our legacy gifts, and some other topics there.
Yeah, that's a fantastic split. And I want to acknowledge Karen's as well, saying dollars to date, which for the whole campaign or the whole project, the whole year, dollars to the month. So we can kind of see this is great, but are we on track in terms of our what we've done in the most recent source of income, which a lot of you have already mentioned. That was something that Liz just talked about, also with Hannah and Emily as well. And then just again, splitting that new and recaptured, that $250 donation is not the same if it's a new person versus it's someone who's given before or someone who've recaptured. Those all mean very different things and have different actions and different responses. So great to be able to segment those things. Thank you all very much for sharing.
Yes, all of that is so super helpful. And it may change, right? Depending on what season you're in. I would venture to guess that there are some things that are always important to have that quick snapshot that you don't have to go in and run the full report, that it's always real time ready for you. But some of the things may depend on what you have. You mentioned, I think, Liz, an appeal responses. If you've done an appeal and you want to see, what's come in and at a quick snapshot, that's going to be much more time sensitive right now. And it may change to something else that you're focused on, in the spring. So all great dialogue. Appreciate all of you for sharing. And my last comment here, let's just remember our database is never going to be clean, right? We too often invest time into making that a project and a priority, and spend a ton of time on it and think, gosh, we've done this. And then all of a sudden the next day something has changed and all of a sudden it's really dirty again. I'm going to say you can continually be working to clean your database if you set the time. Just like, you're going to fill your time with things like events that are coming up instead of major gifts if you let yourself do that, right? So if you make it a priority to keep it as clean as possible as you go, then you're not going to have to set aside this big project time that's going to distract you and get you off task of things like major gifts where you need to be focused. So just remember that you can do the best that you can, but people are constantly going to be moving and changing, and there will be things that are not ever exactly how they need to be. So just do the best you can with what you have in continuing to move forward, and that will help the trend go in the right direction. So with that, I want to close with just a couple more discussion questions. Really would love to hear from the group on what is your biggest headache with data management right now? Anything we either touched on or that we haven't already talked about that you would say, gosh, this is my thorn in my side as it relates to data.
And for sake of time too, y'all can, again, feel free to continue to use that chat and just drop it in there, and that way we can kind of see the overall flow for it.
And as long as, especially if you are dropping things in the chat, what tools or tricks have you found important or useful with data management? You can feel free to answer that one as well, or unmute yourself and share, because we are kind of down to our final minutes. And I don't want to keep anyone past that, but would love to hear if anyone has any additional, for the good of the order, comments or thoughts as it relates to data management.
I'd also like to acknowledge how hard it is to make a data management webinar sound interesting. And I feel like we did an okay job today, but it was like, oh boy, data, what a topic that, it's like also the next week we have watching paint dry. And after that, it's one of those things we tried to make as lively as we could. And we appreciate y'all's participation to help make it so.
Yes. Tammy, inconsistencies drive me crazy. DR period, sometimes drive, other times doctor, right?
Yeah,
like that. No, I think you're right. And especially when you're using a database that's maybe not as smart as a human, right? And things come out. So you just make the decisions and be consistent. I think that's the key. Make a decision. This is always how we're going to track this. There's sometimes there are more than one right answer to how to do it, but you've got to make a decision and then be consistent with it, or your data is not going to match up and you're going to pull it and you're not going to have complete data sets that you hope, right? So that's a really great point. All right. Well, again, thank you all so much. I want to bring